"Laugh one more time," the cowboy said, his voice low enough to chill the whole porch. "And I'll ask for her hand before the sun goes down." The laughter died the way fire dies under hard rain. Ada Mercer stood at the bottom of the mercantile steps with a flour sack in her fist and dust on the hem of her faded blue dress. A moment earlier, three women had been smiling behind gloved fingers while Old Man Blevins, half drunk on noon whiskey, told the crowd that Mercer stock had finally bred itself down to one stubborn filly in patched boots. Even the clerk had smirked. Nobody smirked now. Across the street, horses stamped in the heat. Harness chains clinked. A screen door banged somewhere behind the hotel, and the sound seemed too loud in the silence that followed. Caleb Rusk sat straight-backed on a black gelding in front of the bank, hat brim cutting a dark line over his eyes. Everything about him looked expensive without trying to. His saddle leather gleamed. His boots were polished but dusty at the toe from real riding, not show. He had the kind of stillness men only carried when they knew exactly what they could buy and what they could break. Ada hated him for speaking. She hated herself more for noticing that he had done it before she could. Blevins gave a wet chuckle and tried to recover. "Wasn't but a joke, Rusk." Caleb's gaze never left him. "Then tell a better one." Wind slid through the street, dry and mean, carrying the smell of horse sweat, sun-baked plank, and the sharp iron tang from the smithy at the far end of town. Ada could feel heat licking through the soles of her boots. She set the flour sack on the step and lifted her chin. "I don't need rescuing," she said. That turned heads too. Caleb looked at her then, fully, and what unsettled her wasn't pity. It was recognition, as if he had been waiting for that exact answer. "Good," he said. "I wasn't offering rescue." The crowd loosened, but only enough to breathe. Curiosity replaced mockery. Women leaned closer. Men pretended not to. In Dry Creek, nothing fed a town faster than shame, unless it was scandal. Ada grabbed the flour and stepped off the porch. "Then keep your mouth shut next time my business wanders near it." A few people sucked in breath at that. Nobody spoke to Caleb Rusk that way. Not the ranch hands he paid. Not the merchants who borrowed from him. And certainly not a girl whose fence posts were older than her roof. She started toward the hitch rail, but Sheriff Doyle came out of the bank with a folded notice in his hand. "Ada," he called, not unkindly. "Hold up." Her spine went rigid before she turned. Doyle's face had that careful softness people used around the sick and the newly buried. She knew that face. Folks had worn it for 3 weeks now, ever since her father had been planted under the cedar ridge with his hat on his chest and a bullet hole hidden beneath his Sunday shirt. Doyle stepped down from the boardwalk and handed her the paper. "I'm sorry." She didn't need to open it. The bank seal told her enough. Foreclosure. The word might as well have been branded into her palm. Her ranch was small, half-starved, and thirsty as a sinner in August, but it was hers. It was the last place on earth with her mother's apricot trees, her father's branding fire, her little brother's initials carved into the corral gate before fever took him. She heard the town before she saw it. Breaths, whispers, leather creaking, hunger waking in other people's eyes. Old Blevins muttered. Knew it was coming. A woman near the dry goods window whispered, "Poor thing," in the cruelest tone pity ever learned. Ada unfolded the paper anyway. The black letters swam for half a heartbeat. 7 days. Outstanding note. Water rights in arrears. Property and improvements subject to seizure. Her hand trembled once. She made it stop. 7 days? She asked. Doyle nodded. Funny, she said, voice flat. My father paid spring interest before he died. The banker, Vernon Pike, had been standing in the shade just inside the bank door. Now he came forward, smooth as oil. He was a narrow man with silver spectacles and a mouth that always seemed to be apologizing for the theft it had already committed. Your father paid part, Pike said. The drought changed values. Terms were adjusted. Without telling him, business requires movement, Miss Mercer. She looked at Caleb then, not because she wanted help, but because Pike did. For one flicker of a second, fear moved across the banker's face when Caleb's horse shifted and the saddle leather groaned. Why? Why would Vernon Pike fear the richest cattleman in 3 counties? And why had Caleb spoken for her before the notice was served? Ada folded the paper with slow care. You can have your 7 days, she said. On the 8th, you'd best bring more than paper. Pike smiled thinly. Pride won't water dead land. No, she said, but truth might. She turned away before he could answer, and strode to her wagon. The wheel hub burned her palm when she climbed up. She snapped the reins harder than the mule deserved and drove out under the stares of the whole town. The road to Mercer Ridge ran between mesquite and low stone, the air copper-bright beneath the afternoon sun. Dry grass whispered against the axle. Sweat slid down between her shoulder blades. By the time Dry Creek disappeared behind her, anger had begun to settle into something colder. At the ranch, nothing had changed and everything had. The porch leaned the same way it always had. Windmill blades turned with a tired squeal. One chicken pecked near the trough. But foreclosure had a smell, and now she could taste it. Dust, old paper, coming loss. She fed the mule, carried the flour inside, and forced herself through the motions of living. Water in the kettle, corn in the pan, ammunition checked, rifle cleaned. Every sound in the house came sharpened. The soft pop of firewood, the creak of chair legs, the scrape of her father's tin cup when she moved it from the table and then put it back exactly where it had been. At dusk, she went to the barn with a lantern. The gelding in the last stall stamped once and blew warm breath through the slats. Ada checked his hooves, her fingers moving by habit. When she straightened, she noticed something wrong. Behind the old tack chest, a board in the wall sat crooked, fresh scraped along one edge. Her pulse thudded. She set the lantern down and pulled the board free. Inside the hollow space lay her father's pocket watch, a wrapped bundle of letters, and a leather ledger tied with rawhide. Underneath them rested a silver concho bracelet she had not seen since the day her mother died. Ada opened the ledger. Names, dates, water measurements, payment marks. And on the final page, one line dug so hard into the paper it had nearly torn through. If anything happens to me, do not trust Pike. Ask Rusk about the Black Crossing deal. Hoofbeats shattered the dark outside. Not one horse. Several. Ada blew out the lantern, snatched the ledger, and moved toward the barn door just as a voice rose from the yard. Miss Mercer, Vernon Pike called through the night. You have something that belongs to me. Ada eased the rifle from its peg without making the metal sing. Moonlight leaked through the cracks in the barn wall, painting pale bars across hay, tack, and the gelding's shifting flank. Outside, leather creaked and horses snorted. She counted at least 4 riders by sound alone. Pike did not come collect paper with 4 armed men unless paper was the excuse and fear was the purchase. Funny, she called back, keeping her voice steady. I was about to say the same. A murmur passed between the men outside. Someone laughed under his breath. Pike did not. Your father handled certain records for the bank, he said. Those records were not his to keep. Ada's thumb found the hammer spur and drew it back. Then you should have buried them with him. Silence again. The night smelled of warm horse hide and dry hay, but beneath it she caught another scent. Cigar smoke, expensive and faint. Caleb Rusk. He was out there too. She knew it before she heard him. Pike, Caleb said, and the yard seemed to tighten around his voice. If you came to a grieving woman's house after dark to bully her, you've made a poor decision. Ada hated the relief that hit her. Pike answered fast. I came on legal business. You came with hired guns. Protection. For paperwork? Caleb asked. One of the horses sidestepped. Spurs clicked. Ada imagined the men glancing from banker to cattle baron like dogs waiting to see which master fed better. She opened the barn door with the rifle leveled. Moonlight silvered the yard. Pike sat stiff on a bay mare, spectacles glinting. 2 ranch toughs flanked him with shotguns across their laps. Sheriff Doyle was not among them. Caleb waited a few yards off, alone, one hand loose on his reins, the other near, but not on his holster. He looked like a man who had not come to start a war and would finish one if it arrived. Ada stepped out onto the packed dirt. Wind dragged at loose strands of her hair. You serve warrants in daylight, Mr. Pike. Pike's jaw flexed. Return the ledger. So he knew exactly what she had found. Caleb's eyes shifted to her hand, then to the ledger tucked under her arm. He read enough from that glance alone. Let him leave, he said quietly. To you? Ada shot back. His gaze met hers. To morning. Pike straightened in the saddle. Miss Mercer, the debt remains. If you persist in theft as well, the consequences will worsen. Ada took 2 steps closer, rifle steady. My father wrote that if anything happened to him, I should ask Caleb Rusk about the Black Crossing deal. The name struck the yard like flint. Pike's face emptied. One of the hired men swore softly. Caleb did not move, but something cold entered his eyes. You should go, Caleb told Pike. For a long second, Ada thought the banker might push harder. Then he saw the choice laid bare before him. Force the matter and expose whatever Black Crossing was, or retreat and plot cleaner violence. He gathered his reins. This isn't finished, he said. No, Ada answered. It surely isn't. The riders wheeled away in a scatter of dust and hoof thuds. Caleb stayed where he was until the last echo faded toward the road. Then he swung down from the saddle and faced her across the yard. Show me the ledger. She kept the rifle up. Talk first. His mouth almost smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Fair enough. Crickets rasped in the weeds. Somewhere beyond the fence, a coyote yipped once and was answered from the ridge. The ranch house behind her gave a low groan as night wind leaned against it. What is Black Crossing? She asked. Caleb took off his hat. Moonlight found the scar along his temple, white against brown skin. A water survey your father helped record 6 years ago. Pike moved boundaries on paper and stole access from smaller spreads. Men lost stock. 2 families left the territory. And my father helped. He thought he was correcting flood damage maps. When he learned the truth, he refused to sign the final transfer. Ada's throat tightened. Then why didn't he go public? He tried. She heard what he did not say, and paid for it. Why do you know this? Caleb looked past her shoulder at the dark outline of the house. Because my father financed Pike's first expansion. Because I found out too late. Because your father came to me the week before he died and told me if I had any honor, I'd stop what my family helped build. The windmill squealed once above them like an old thing in pain. Ada lowered the rifle a fraction. And did you? I started. He looked at her again. Not fast enough. There it was. Not pity. Guilt. She should have thrown him off the land. Should have told him to take his fine horse and his fine sorrow back to town and choke on both. But the ledger was heavy in her arm, and 7 days were all the law claimed to leave her. Anger was useful. Pride was not always enough. What do you want? She asked. His answer came plain. To help you keep this ranch. To expose Pike. To pay a debt my father never did. That can be done without announcing yourself in front of half the town. Caleb's jaw tightened. I said what I said because men like Blevins only hear power when another man uses it. And what exactly did you mean? He held her gaze. What I meant was this. Pike will come harder if he thinks you stand alone. If the town thinks you're under my protection, some of them will hesitate. Protection, she repeated. Or possession? His voice dropped. That is your choice, not mine. The words settled between them. Inside the house, the kettle lid rattled where she had left it crooked. The smell of banked coals drifted through the open window. Ada realized suddenly how tired she was. Not weak tired. Bone tired. Funeral tired. Debt tired. Tired of being measured by what had been taken from her. If you stay, she said, you stay on my terms. Caleb inclined his head once. You don't speak for me again unless I ask. All right. You don't touch that ledger unless I'm holding the other end. All right. And if anybody in town thinks I'm marrying you to save this place, I'll set them straight myself. For the first time, a trace of real warmth touched his face. I expect you would. She let the rifle rest against her leg. He drew a folded paper from inside his coat and offered it to her. These are duplicate filings I pulled from the county office. Names matched the first pages of that ledger. Your father wasn't the only one who knew something was wrong. Ada did not take the paper at once. When she did, their fingers brushed. His hand was rougher than she expected, warm from the ride, scarred across the knuckles. A working man's hand hidden inside a rich man's life. Headlights did not exist in that world, but danger still announced itself from a distance. A glow rose beyond the south pasture then, low and orange, moving fast. Ada turned. Fire, she said. The hay shed erupted in flame. And from the road below, a horn sounded twice, sharp, urgent, official. Sheriff Doyle's voice carried through the dark. Ada Mercer. Caleb Rusk. Come out armed if you mean to live. Pike's got a judge riding with him. By the time Doyle reached the yard, sparks were already lifting off the hay shed like a swarm of angry stars. Ada ran for the pump. Caleb beat her there, wrenching the handle down hard while she seized buckets and sloshed water against the spreading fire. Heat struck her face in blistering waves. Smoke rolled thick and bitter, filling her nose and mouth with scorched grass and old dust. The mule brayed from the lean-to. Horses hammered their stalls. Leave the shed, Doyle shouted, swinging down from his lathered horse. Save the barn. No choice then. Ada dropped the empty bucket and sprinted through sparks toward the lean-to, coughing, skirts tangling around her boots. Caleb tore the bar loose while she dragged the mule clear. The animal nearly crushed her shoulder in panic, but she slapped its neck and shoved it toward the corral. Behind them, the shed roof gave a cracking groan. Doyle caught her arm. Judge Harlan signed seizure papers at Pike's request. They're on the road with 6 men. At midnight, she snapped. Pike called it emergency enforcement after claiming stolen records and armed resistance. Caleb's face went dark with something beyond anger. How far? 10 minutes, maybe less. The shed collapsed in a burst of sparks. The heat shoved all 3 of them back. Ada wiped ash from her eyes. Then we don't stand here talking. They moved fast. Caleb saddled his black gelding while Ada ran inside for the ledger, ammunition, and the small wrapped bundle from the wall hollow. Her father's room smelled of cedar, cold coffee, and the faint ghost of shaving soap. She snatched the silver bracelet without thinking and shoved it into her pocket. When she came back outside, flames were painting the yard orange and gold. North Draw, Doyle said. There's a cut through the rocks to old Miller Line shack. Ada handed him the duplicate filings. Take these to Pastor Hale. He'll lock them in the church iron box. Doyle stared. You trust a preacher over me? I trust Pike to search your office first. He almost smiled despite the smoke. Fair enough. Caleb swung into the saddle. Ride with us. Doyle shook his head. If I vanish too, Pike owns the story by sunrise. I slow them. You keep that ledger breathing. They heard riders before they saw them. A distant thunder growing beneath the hiss of burning hay. Then lanterns bobbed along the road like floating eyes. Ada mounted bareback on her bay mare because there was no time for more. The leather was hot from the stable. The animal danced under her, wild with fire scent. Go, Doyle barked. She and Caleb hit the north pasture at a dead run, just as the first shots cracked through the dark. Splinters jumped from the gatepost behind her head. Her mare lunged. Wind tore tears from her eyes. The night became motion and noise. Hoofbeats drumming the earth, mesquite branches whipping at her sleeves. Caleb's black horse keeping hard pace at her right side. Down in the saddle, he shouted. Another shot ripped the air. This one came closer, mean and flat. Ada bent low over the mare's neck, tasting smoke and sweat and the copper bite of fear. Behind them, men yelled. Someone cursed Doyle. A lantern shattered. For one wild second the prairie flashed orange, and she saw Pike riding among them after all, coat-tails flying, his careful banker's face twisted raw with greed. The wash opened ahead, a dark split in the land. Ada knew it blind. She had ridden it since childhood, chasing strays and jackrabbits, learning where stone gave underhoof and where it held. She cut left without warning. Caleb followed. The pursuers overshot by a heartbeat, enough to matter. Ada drove her mare down the narrow wash, gravel spraying under pounding hooves. Walls of rock rose on either side. Sound changed there, turning every hoofbeat into war drums. They'll box us at the crossing, Caleb called. Not if we reach the shelf trail first. The shelf trail was little more than a scar scratched into stone, high and mean and dangerous in daylight. At night it bordered on madness. But madness beat surrender. They burst from the wash into a wider basin and saw the problem at once. Tommy Reed, the Mercer Ranch hand barely 16 and loyal as sunrise, was on the far side trying to cut loose 2 remuda horses trapped against a fallen cottonwood. He looked up, panic-white in the moonlight. Miss Ada. Then another rider broke from behind the rocks and leveled a rifle at the boy. Everything in Ada narrowed. The ledger under her arm. The shelf trail to freedom. The boy about to die. Go, Caleb shouted. Take the trail. Instead, she yanked her mare toward Tommy. The shot rang. Tommy ducked. Ada fired from the saddle, once, and felt the kick jolt up through her wrist. The attacker reeled backward. Caleb swore and wheeled with her, though doing so gave up the lead they needed. Dust exploded as Pike's men poured into the basin behind them. Cut them loose, Ada yelled. Tommy slashed the remuda rope with a pocket knife. The horses bolted in a screaming wave, hooves striking sparks off stone. They smashed straight through the nearest pursuers, throwing the line into chaos. Caleb grabbed Tommy by the collar and hauled him up behind his saddle. Move. They drove toward the shelf trail, 3 abreast now. Too slow, too exposed. A bullet tore through Ada's sleeve and burned a hot line along her upper arm. She bit back the cry. Another struck rock by Caleb's knee and sprayed stone chips into the air. At the base of the trail, Pike himself rode out ahead of the others and blocked the way. "This ends now," he shouted. Moonlight laid silver across the gun in his hand. Caleb dismounted before the horse fully stopped. He moved with terrifying calm, stepping into the open while Tommy clung white-knuckled behind the saddle and Ada fought to control her heaving mare. "Take the boy and ride," Caleb said. Ada stared. "No, that wasn't a request." Pike laughed once, breathless and sharp. "Still pretending honor can clean blood, Rusk?" The name hit harder than the fire had. Ada looked from Pike to Caleb. "What blood?" Pike's smile widened. Tell her whose brand paid the men at Black Crossing when her father tried to stop the water theft. Tell her who stood to inherit the whole valley if Mercerland failed." Caleb's silence lasted one beat too long. That was answer enough. Something inside Ada split cold. "You knew," she said. Caleb turned toward her, face stripped bare. "I knew my father's money-financed Pike. I did not know your father would be killed. By the time I learned enough, it was done." "Done?" she snapped. "My father is in the ground." Pike raised the pistol higher. "And you'll join him if you don't hand over the ledger." The men behind him spread into a half circle, cutting off the basin. Ada could smell their horses, rank and hot. She could hear Tommy's ragged breathing, the scrape of Caleb's boot in the gravel, the hiss of wind through the rock cut above them. Impossible choice. Trust the man tied to her ruin, or lose everything to the man who finished it. Ada reached slowly into her coat. Pike smiled, thinking surrender. Instead, she pulled out the silver bracelet and saw Caleb's eyes widen. Inside one loose concho, folded smaller than a postage stamp, her mother's hidden paper slipped free into her palm. A map, not of land, of the original spring line Pike had stolen. Pike saw it too. His face went white. And then Tommy shouted, "Behind you!" Sheriff Doyle's shotgun boomed from the ridge. Chaos exploded. Dawn found them alive, hiding in the old Miller Line shack with smoke still in their clothes and blood drying stiff on Caleb's shirt. Doyle's ambush on the ridge had broken Pike's circle just long enough for escape. In the scramble, Ada had dragged Tommy onto the shelf trail while Caleb covered them from below, taking a bullet crease along his ribs before vaulting onto his horse and following under a storm of gunfire. They rode blind through the blackest hour before sunrise, crossing stone, cactus, and dry wash until the line shack rose out of the pale desert like a forgotten grave marker. Now the place held the smells of lamp oil, dust, sagebrush, and fresh blood. Tommy slept on a blanket in the corner, dead tired and unhurt beyond bruises. Doyle had ridden back toward town before first light to hold what law he still could. That left Ada and Caleb alone with the quiet that follows surviving. She knelt beside him on a broken crate. "Hold still," she said. "I am holding still." "You're arguing." "I'm bleeding." It lends itself to comment. She did not smile, though the corner of her mouth wanted to. She cut away the torn edge of his shirt with her skinning knife. The wound was shallow but ugly, a red groove along his side where the bullet had kissed and gone on. He hissed when she cleaned it with whiskey. "Mercy," he muttered. "Mercy isn't gentle," she said. "Stop flinching." Morning light slipped through the crooked shutters and thin gold bars, touching the dust in the air, the cracked wash basin, the old potbelly stove rusted through on one side. Outside, wind moved across dry grass with a soft brushing sound like hands over cloth. Caleb watched her work. "You learned that from your father?" "From living where no doctor comes unless somebody richer sends for him." The words landed harder than she meant. She tied the bandage, then sat back on her heels. Her own sleeve was stiff with blood where the bullet had grazed her arm, but she ignored it. For a while neither of them spoke. The silence was not empty. It held the night behind them and the day ahead. Pike still had men. Judge Harlan still had papers. Half the town would believe money before truth. Yet in that small shack, with Tommy breathing softly in the corner and dawn brightening the threshold, the world narrowed to rough wood, ache, and choice. Caleb reached into his vest pocket and withdrew something wrapped in cloth. "For you," he said. Ada did not take it at once. "What is it?" "Something your father gave me the last time I saw him." She unfolded the cloth. Inside lay a brass spur rowel, one point bent, and a plain gold ring threaded through it on a leather strip. Her mother's wedding ring. Ada's throat closed. I thought it was buried with her, she whispered. Your father kept it after she died. Said he wasn't strong enough to look at it every day, so he hid it where he wouldn't sell it in hard times. The night he came to me, he said if trouble reached him first, I was to put it back in your hand only when I'd earned the right to carry his last request. She stared at the ring, worn thin at the bottom from years of real use. Her mother had kneaded bread with that hand, brushed hair from Ada's fevered forehead, planted apricot pits in spring mud, and laughed when none of them should have lived in that hard ground. You waited, Ada said. I hadn't earned it. She looked up. Have you now? Caleb did not answer quickly. When he did, his voice was stripped to honesty. No, but I'd rather tell the truth and stand smaller in your eyes than keep one more secret and deserve the size I was born to. That hurt because it was clean. She threaded the ring onto her own finger. It fit her little finger only, but the weight of it steadied something in her chest. My father must have trusted you some. He trusted what I might become, Caleb said. Not what I was. Tommy stirred, rolled over, and slept again. Ada rose to stir the embers in the stove, though they needed no stirring. Action was easier than feeling. Pike wants the spring line map more than the ledger, she said. That means the county filings can still be challenged. If Doyle gets them to Hale. If Hale doesn't scare easy. Caleb gave a dry breath that almost passed for laughter. Preachers fear God. Men like Pike are smaller targets. She turned back to him. Why never marry? The question surprised both of them. He leaned his head against the wall. Light touched the fatigue under his eyes. Because I watched money turn every promise in my father's house into a bargain. Because women came around me looking at cattle figures before they looked at my face. Because by the time I wanted something real, I'd become a man people measured with suspicion for good reason. Ada crossed her arms over her torn sleeve. You think I don't measure you that way? I know you do. Good. He nodded once. Good. A hawk cried outside, sharp and lonely over the flats. Ada sat opposite him on the floor, back against the wall, knees drawn up. When they laughed at me in town, I wasn't angry because they thought I was poor. I was angry because they thought poor meant easy. Easy to shame. Easy to move aside. Easy to buy. Caleb looked at her without blinking. And what does rich mean then? Lonely, she said before she could stop herself. Something changed in his face. Not triumph. Not surprise. Recognition. The air between them softened and grew more dangerous for it. She pulled the silver bracelet from her pocket and turned it in the light. My mother used to say silver only shines after fire and rubbing. Said people weren't much different. Caleb's gaze dropped to the bracelet, then lifted again. Your mother sounds wiser than most judges. She was. Ada fastened the bracelet onto her wrist. And stubborn. I had noticed the family resemblance. This time she did smile, barely, and it felt strange after so much ash. Then hoofbeats sounded outside. Both of them moved at once, she for the rifle, he for the door. A voice came from beyond the shack. Don't shoot, Pastor Hale called. I brought the whole town. Ada froze. Caleb opened the door a crack. Beyond it, under the hard, clean noon sky, stood Hale, Sheriff Doyle, Tommy's mother, half a dozen ranchers, and at the back of the crowd more faces from Dry Creek than Ada could count. Some ashamed, some curious, some angry. And tied behind Doyle's saddle, wrists bound with reins, was Judge Harlan. Pastor Hale lifted his Bible in one hand and Doyle's evidence satchel in the other. Hale says the church box held enough papers to swing public testimony, Doyle called. But Pike's telling folks you and Rusk ran because you're guilty. Ada stepped to the doorway, sunlight striking the bracelet on her wrist. Then let him tell it, she said. Tonight, he tells it to my face. By sundown, every soul in Dry Creek who loved truth, hated Pike, feared scandal, or simply could not resist a public reckoning had gathered in front of the church. The sky burned red behind the bell tower. Dust hovered over the street in a copper haze. Horses lined the hitch rails, restless in the cooling air. Lamps glowed in the mercantile windows. The whole town smelled of sweat, kerosene, dry wood, and the storm waiting somewhere beyond the western hills. Ada stood on the church steps with the ledger in one hand and her father's ring warm on her finger. The silver bracelet flashed at her wrist each time the wind caught her sleeve. Beside her stood Pastor Hale, Sheriff Doyle, Tommy Reed with both eyes swollen from lack of sleep and too much excitement, and Caleb Rusk, bandaged beneath a clean shirt, hat in hand. Across the street, Vernon Pike dismounted in front of the bank. He did not come alone. 4 armed men followed him, along with 3 town merchants, 2 indebted to oppose him, and 2 ranchers mean enough to mistake bullying for strength. Pike's spectacles flashed in the last light. He glanced at the crowd and saw something he had not expected. People were not shrinking. They were watching. Judge Harlan, wrists tied and mouth set in a miserable line, sat under Doyle's guard near the water trough. That one sight cracked Pike's calm for half a breath. Ada saw it and stepped forward. "You served midnight papers on stolen boundaries," she said, her voice carrying farther than she expected. "You altered loan terms after payment. You threatened my land, burned my hay, and came riding after dark for records you claimed did not exist." Pike lifted his chin. These are fever words from a grieving girl being used by a wealthy man with his own ambitions. Murmurs moved through the crowd. Caleb did not answer. Ada was glad for it. This belonged to her now. She opened the ledger and held it high. "My father wrote every change you made at Black Crossing. Water diverted. Lines moved. Signatures pressured. This book matches the county duplicates Pastor Hale holds. The survey map hidden in my mother's bracelet, and the testimony Judge Harlan gave once Doyle showed him the bribe note in Pike's own hand." Harlan shut his eyes. Pike's mouth went hard. "Lies." Pastor Hale raised the satchel. "Then sue the church before God and the whole town." A few people laughed, nervous but real. Pike heard the shift. Power was slipping, and he knew it. He turned to the crowd with the smooth voice he used on debtors and widows. "Even if some lines were corrected for business necessity, the Mercer note still stands. The ranch fails. The girl cannot pay. The law is the law. That was the old trick. When theft is cornered, become respectable." Ada descended one step, then another, until she stood almost level with him in the street. "The law," she said, "didn't light my hay shed. The law didn't ride armed to my door at midnight. The law didn't kill my father when he refused to lie." The last words struck clean and deep. Someone in the crowd said, "Killed." Tommy Reed pointed straight at Pike. "I seen his man Hob Sutter at Mercer Ridge the day Mr. Mercer died. Same scar on the jaw." Every face in town turned toward one of Pike's hired men. Hob Sutter's hand twitched toward his gun. Doyle cocked the shotgun. "Try it," the sheriff said. Hob hesitated. Caleb spoke then, quiet but carrying. "Sutter, Pike can't buy you out of a hanging if 5 dozen witnesses hear you name him first." The man's jaw worked. Sweat shone under his hatband. "He told us to scare Mercer," Hob blurted. "Said nobody'd miss one more drought death. The old man grabbed for my rifle. It went off. Pike said we bury the truth with him." The square erupted. Gasps, curses, women covering their mouths, men stepping back as if the banker's guilt might stain their boots. Pike's face emptied of every civilized expression it had ever worn. "You fool," he hissed. Then he drew. The pistol cleared leather in a blur, but Ada had been watching his shoulders, not his hands. Her father taught her that. She moved before the muzzle settled, firing once. The shot struck Pike's wrist. His gun spun into the dirt. Sutter bolted toward an alley. Caleb tackled him mid-stride, both men crashing into the trough with a burst of water and curses. One of Pike's other riders reached for a shotgun, thought better of it when half the town surged backward and Doyle swung his barrel toward him. Pike clutched his bleeding wrist and glared up at Ada from one knee. "You think this makes you safe?" "No," she said, breathing hard. "It makes me free." He lunged anyway, not for a gun this time, but for the bracelet at her wrist, the last proof he could still destroy. Ada twisted aside. He caught her sleeve. Cloth ripped. Caleb came off the trough like a storm, but Ada was faster. She drove her father's ledger straight into Pike's face, stunning him long enough to slam the heel of her boot into his chest. He hit the dirt flat on his back. Doyle and 2 ranchers pinned him before he could rise again. For a moment the whole square held still. The bell rope tapped softly against the church wall in the wind. Then sound returned all at once. Voices. Relief. Anger. A baby crying somewhere near the mercantile porch. Horses blowing through their noses. Pastor Hale calling for calm while sounding more satisfied than any preacher ought. Caleb came to Ada, water dripping from one sleeve, knuckles bloodied, eyes fixed on her as though the rest of the town had gone dim. "You all right?" he asked. She looked at the torn cloth, the smoke stains, the shaking in her own hands. Then at Pike in the dirt, At Judge Harlan weeping openly now that courage cost him less than fear, at Tommy Reed standing taller than he had that morning. Yes, she said. I think I am. The legal part took less time once truth had witnesses. Pike was jailed in the back of the sheriff's office until the territorial marshal arrived. Judge Harlan signed a full reversal of the Mercer foreclosure before midnight, and under Hale's watchful eye he restored the original spring line to every spread robbed by Black Crossing. Hob Sutter, eager to save his own neck, named each rider and each payment. By dawn, Vernon Pike's bank was not his bank anymore. 3 days later, the town gathered again, but this time the mood had changed. Women brought pies. Men fixed fence rails without being asked. Even old Blevins took off his hat when Ada passed and muttered an apology that smelled strongly of humility and weak tobacco. The hay shed would need rebuilding. The ranch still needed rain. Life had not turned soft because justice showed up. But the land was hers, and the spring line ran clear again. Near sunset, Caleb found her by the apricot trees behind the house. The orchard was small and half-wild, leaves silver-green in the lowering light. Crickets had begun their evening song. The air held that tender coolness that comes after a punishing day, when dust settles and the world seems willing to breathe again. He stopped an arm's length away. No horse, no audience, no shield of wealth. I spoke for you once without earning it, he said. I won't do that again. So I'm asking plain. Ada waited. I love the woman who stood in a burning yard with a ledger under one arm and a rifle in the other. I love the woman who chose a boy's life over her own safety, who faced a town with truth and didn't shake until after. I cannot undo what my family helped do to yours. I can only spend the rest of my life building something cleaner in its place. He swallowed once. Ada Mercer, if someday you want it, I would be honored to ask for your hand and spend my years proving worthy of it. Someday. Not now or never. Not ownership. Not rescue. Choice. Ada looked at the ring on her little finger, at the bracelet on her wrist, at the man before her with dust on his boots and no lie left in him. The evening wind moved through the apricot leaves with a soft, bright whisper. She stepped closer. You may ask, she said. His breath caught. And my answer, she went on, the smallest smile finding her at last, is yes. But we marry after the shed is rebuilt, after Tommy learns to mend a gate straight, and after you understand I won't stop being myself just because I stand beside you. A laugh broke out of him then, low and astonished and full of relief. I would not dare ask it. She laid her hand in his. A year later, travelers passing Mercer Ridge would see a new hay shed, stronger than the last, and 2 names carved into the barn beam beside the old brand. Ada Mercer Rusk and Caleb Rusk, not one swallowing the other, both cut deep into the same honest wood. At dusk, when the spring ran gold and the apricot leaves trembled in the wind, folks said the ranch looked less like a place saved by money than a place redeemed by courage. And on certain evenings, if the light fell soft over the porch and the horses grazed quiet below the ridge, a woman in a blue work dress and a man with scarred knuckles could be seen standing side by side, her silver bracelet bright against his hand, while the sun went down behind them and turned the whole hard country into fire.